'Tis I, your old pal, King Chuck. Now, normally I do biatch of the day on these podcasts, but we're going to talk about radio news in northern Michigan for a little bit. Of course, when I started Chuck69.com, the main purpose was I wanted Howard Stern's radio show up north, and I started to learn a lot more about the radio business in northern Michigan and why it sucks, and when I was young, most of the radio station owners would never give me a hot minute, if you know what I mean. So now Northern Michigan radio is just like radio here in Grand Rapids. Three radio companies control most of the media. Three companies, and those three companies are MacDonald Garber Broadcasting, which has KHQ, Light 96, Bob FM, and a few others. You have Midwestern Broadcasting. They've been around since 1939, founded and still owned by the same family that's actually started it all those years ago. They have WTCM, WCCW, Z93, and KLT. And there's the new kid on the block, Black Diamond Broadcasting. They've only been around for like 15 years. But they own a bunch of stations too, including Rock 105 and 955, Big Country 102.9, and The Bear, Classic Rock Station. And all three media companies have had some major changes from the holidays up until the start of the new year. And let's review some of the big changes that we are aware of. And bear in mind, now we are based here in Grand Rapids. So, big change number one, let's go to MacDonald Garber Broadcasting. So, 96.7 WLXV in Cadillac is back to simulcasting Light 96 WLXT in Cadillac in Petoskey, full time. So the story goes like this: 96.7 throughout most of the 90s simulcasted 96.3. They just called the stations Light 96. Well, so this is what happened. About 25 years ago, 96.7 broke away from 96.3. And they had their own identity with their own AC format called Mix 96. And anyway, most of the time, Mix 96's ratings were kind of in the shitter. So now, Mix 96 would then become, just a few short years ago, 96.7 The Bull, playing country music. And they did okay, considering that they didn't have a great, the station doesn't have necessarily a great signal in Traverse. But anyway, so as we all know, as most people in northern Michigan know, there was a major ice storm late last year. Well, very early spring of last year. Early spring, late winter. And it was a quagmire. And some buildings were destroyed. A lot of trees fell down, and it was almost painful to watch at times. So this is what happened. Some of the biggest casualties were some radio station towers, and the majority of the towers that were destroyed were MacDonald Garber's. So 96.3 is now broadcasting reduced power, and so is KHQ. So now, and obviously it takes a very long time to construct and build and plan a radio station tower. You can't it doesn't get built overnight, as we all know. You gotta have FCC approval on this, that, and everything else. And of course, yeah, have some good engineers with who know their math, So, long story short, it's not like you can just slap on a big old power stick and call it good. So anyway, Light 96. So 96.3 is at reduced power. So 96.7 is back to simulcasting. They started simulcasting again during the Christmas season. So they, some people who can get the station in the Traverse City area could listen to the station. Now, Cadillac already has an AC station, which is WCDY, which went from top 40 last year, about a year or two ago. So, what's going on is that the question is this move permanent? Will 96? So when 96.3 is back at full power, will 96.7 go back to being the Bull, because the Bull's website's still up and they still have an audio stream? And it's kind of hard to tell because they didn't say that it was a full-time move, so anything can happen at this point. But here's another problem that that might be irking the people at MacDonald Garber. So that was the big move with MacDonald Garber. So now Midwestern Broadcasting, which is WTCM, WCCW, etc. So the story is they had a station at 1310 AM, WCCW, for the last several years. They've been calling it WTCM Gold. On Monday, WTCM Gold went by the wayside and became 1310 the ticket. So the story is that late last year, a couple of months ago, 97.1 the ticket in Detroit launched a statewide sports network that is currently airing on a bunch of stations here in Michigan. Here in Grand Rapids, it's at 98.7. And 98.7, when that happened, 98.7, which was the Grand, well, they moved their format over to 100.5, the River. So now, what's going on is that in Traverse City, 1310, which had been WTCM Gold, didn't generate much in the way of ratings. So this is the story. When I was a kid, 1310 was my grandmother's favorite station. It was, they were an adult standard station, unforgettable 1310. And they actually simulcasted on 1370 AM in Cadillac, because Ross owned that station for a while. Yeah, he bought the station when he bought 92.9. So, anyway, yeah, the two stations were actually founded by John Fetzer. Fetzer, of course, was also the longtime owner of 9 and 10. So anyway, the rest of the story was that the two stations simulcasted for many years, and then in 2000 it became an ESPN affiliate. It became Traverse City's first full-blown sports station. And then it lost ESPN about 10 years later, when 106.7 and 105.5 took the ESPN franchise, and it went to like the CBS Sports Network. I think it was like a mix of ESPN and CBS Sports. I could be right, could be wrong. So it's like, anyway, but then they decided, an FM sports station is gonna kick, is already kicking our ass. Why not try something else? So this is what happened. They went to oldies. They went to oldies for a while as simply AM 13, and then they and then they flipped again back to sports when ESPN 106.7 and 105.5 was, of course, it was sold off. Both stations were sold off to new owners. Of course, 106.7 is now Star Country, which is owned by MacDonald Garber, and 105.5 went to Jesus. So this is what happened. They brought ESPN back to 1310, and then ESPN was like, we're gonna try to get rid of our radio stations, And I also heard they wanted more money, so that was kind of how it went. So it just wasn't worth it to keep ESPN, so they started a brand new format. This time they went to Classic Country as WTCM Gold, with the tagline, yesterday's country music, because WTCM is today's country music. And some people even say that the TCM and WTCM actually stands for today's country music. Wrong. Traverse City, Michigan. Yeah. So, long story short was that, so anyway, because of all this and all the format changes and so on, Traverse City did not have a sports station for many years, and even worse, an affiliate for the Detroit Tigers and Red Wings and Pistons and so this is what happened. So with this brand new sports network being launched recently by 97.1 Detroit, it did make perfect sense for 1310 to flip to sports. Now there is a small problem though, and that's the fact that 1310 at this current moment is a daytime only operation. And the reason why was because they lost their transmitter site a few years ago. So they've been broadcasting from a temporary site for a couple of years, and they didn't want to haggle with a nighttime site. So I don't know what's the full future is. I mean, Midwestern probably knows a little bit more than I am, and plus a lot of AM stations have been signing off as of late as well. I don't know if Midwestern wants to keep it on the air or not, or see it as economically viable. But I'm not Midwestern, so there you go. So the story goes like this. So there is a small problem. 1310 is now called The Ticket to match with 97.1 The Ticket in Detroit. The problem is that MacDonald Garber already has stations called The Ticket in Cadillac at 93.7 and up in Petoskey at 1340, excuse me. So I would imagine that Trish has probably called her lawyer and begged for a cease and desist and given it to Midwestern. And I mean, Midwestern's excuse will probably be that, well, none of those two stations cover Traverse City very well, and 1310 doesn't really make it down to Cadillac or Petoskey either. So now it will be pretty interesting to see. But also another thing to notice is the fact that maybe it will create some dialogue about creating a Tiger or Red Wing or Pistons affiliate for Traverse City, because none of those teams have been on the air in this area for a long time. And there are a lot of folks who miss listening to the Tigers on the radio, and I don't blame them. The Tigers have always been, they had a decent season last year. Yeah, they kind of collapsed towards the end, but they still made it well into the playoffs. But the point is, folks, is that people in Northern Michigan love sports. I don't want to hear, well, yeah, and I understand there's people who are like, they can listen to the games online too. So maybe this will create some further dialogue that, yes, Midwestern still cares about Detroit sports, because now they have this network on 1310. And it might, and I'll be honest with you, I think it might generate some better ratings than the past networks that were on there, like Fox Sports and ESPN. So only time will tell. But meanwhile, so anyway, so that's some good news there. Thank God Traverse City does not have a station that carries that fat blob huge. Jack O'Malley, I don't know if, Jack O'Malley was 1310's morning guy. I don't know. Yeah, I'm pretty sure he's I know he does a weekly show for WTCM. He's probably still doing that. I mean, the guy's pretty much semi-retired anyway. I don't know if it was his decision to leave the station, or, stop doing the morning show. It was their decision. I'm guessing it was their decision. He probably wanted more money. And they were like, yeah, daytime only station. Like, that's going to happen. Okay. Yeah, he even did a radio show, apparently, on 1310. Yeah, I would have loved to hear Richard and Sal from the Stern Show calling them constantly. And we do have some news about Stern, too. Yeah, he just announced on this morning's show that he's now going to work only Mondays and Tuesdays. And that he is totally done doing the rest of the week. He says he cares a lot about his health. And, yeah, I don't blame him, it is kind of sucky that he's only doing 2 shows a week, 3 hours a day. Yeah, he's only working 6 hours a week, but hey, you gotta remember, the dude is gonna be 72 years old in a couple of days. So, but then again, there's a lot of radio folks who have been, who work well into their 90s, like Paul Harvey did. So, anyway, of course, Midwestern, they own WCCW FM as well, 107.5. And as I reported yesterday, the station has revamped the station. The station has been revamped as Good Vibes 107.5. I did listen to them on the weekend, and I was not impressed by the imaging. They had some. It sounded like some middle-aged secretary doing all the liners, and it's like it sounds like crap. It's like when a radio station does that, it shows how low budget they are. Yeah. So anyway, but I think the biggest change so far is, of course, I told you about Midwestern. I told you about MacDonald Garber. But Black Diamond, oh boy, they've done some, oh man, it looks like they got the old shredder out. So, here's what's going on. Classic Rock the Bear has a new midday guy and afternoon guy. The midday guy is Dave Barr. Dave Barr, of course, lives in Traverse City. He is a right-wing turd, unfortunately. I remembered he ran for something in Traverse City and lost. And yeah, I heard some not so nice things about Dave, unfortunately. And the new afternoon guy is Guy Dark, who is also the operations manager for the company. So Guy Dark was the former night guy at Rock 105 and 95.5. So anyway, they decided to move him over to the Bear. Now, the old midday guy at the Bear was a guy named Uncle Buck. Just by looking at him, he's probably retired by now. And then the old afternoon guy, his name was I think it was Jay Summers. So the story is, he's not even local to Northern Michigan. He actually is I believe he lives in Wisconsin and does voice tracking for a bunch of different stations. So anyway, his situation is that, so it was no really big loss right then and there. I mean, the Bears' ratings are in the shitter anyway. So as for Rock 105 and 95.5, this is where things get a little tricky. So their old lineup was Cartman did the morning show. Middays were Ann Carlini. Afternoons were Dave Doran. Both Carlini and Doran worked at WRIF some years back. And nights were Guy Dark. And Guy Dark, by the way, he's another guy who's worked all over the place. So the story with Guy Dark moving, so this is the story. Guy Dark moves to the Bear, and Dave Doran apparently is out. So I don't know. So here's the story. From the looks of things, Dave Doran actually moved to another station. And that station is WJML, which, so there's this guy named John Yob. He purchased the old WJML 1110 up in Petoskey and a few other stations here and there. And he had a dream of creating this ultra right-wing stupidity talk radio network. And it did not necessarily go well. He leased the stations for a while to Blarney Stone. Yeah, Blarney Stone Broadcasting, Q100, their sports station down there too at 101.1. So they did that for a while, but then they decided that they were going to sell the stations, and that's what's happening. They created this placeholder format that was around the clock Grateful Dead music, and then they decided that during the daytime, they would play country music as Wine Country Radio. So that's what's going on. They decided, the story was, I guess they sold 1110 in Petoskey to a religious outfit. And they ended up with 106.3's old call letters, which was WWMN. Of course, the story with the 106.3 was that they were an adult alternative station called The Mitten that didn't last very long, unfortunately. It was kind of a unique station. I did listen to them for a few times. And then the guy who owned it sold it to John Yob. So the story was, now John is trying to sell his stations, apparently, and he created this placeholder format. So they call it Wine Country Radio. During the daytime, it's a satellite-fed format. And at night, they go straight to Grateful Dead music. So that's kind of what's going on. Yeah, they even on their webs, they have the Facebook page. They did put up a new logo, not too long ago. It's a picture of a microphone that's that's shaped like a wine glass. Kind of an interesting logo, to say the least, but who knows how long that's going to last. But yeah, it consists of 4 different stations, 106.3 in Thompsonville, and then there's 101.1 in Traverse City, which is a translator, and 1210 AM in Kingsley. And of course, that station is a daytime only station. And believe it or not, 960 AM in Rogers City. So, anyway, the story is, I guess Dave Doran is now there. So now, Rock 105 and 95.5, what they're doing is they decided to increase Cartman and Carlini shifts. Cartman to 6 hours a day. Carmen now, get this, he's on the air now from 7 a.m. to 1 in the afternoon, which is very odd. Carlini is on from 1 till 7. And when I saw the schedule, I was like, this reminds me, you know what, it's kind of ironic that Black Diamond owns the old WKKM in Harrison. 92.1, the king of country music. Yeah. The Mighty 92. Insert drum roll here. WKKM, king of the country. The Mighty 92. Oh my God. I love that. Even though I hate country music with a passion. I actually loved WKKM. I mean, this was a station that played almost nothing but vinyl. And I read about the guy who owned it. His name was David Carmine. He was a very eccentric man. He had this massive record collection. And, yeah, he was also a bit of a pack rat, too. Kind of like me. And, yeah, the guy, apparently he never married nor had kids. He made that station his life, pretty much. And then he retired and then sold it originally to Xavier University. And then Xavier actually sold it to the folks who own WUPS, and then Black Diamond got it. So it's now 92.1 The Twister. And so what happened was the Twister, so yes, it's kind of ironic because, you know, when WKKM was still around, what was funny about the station was that they kind of did the same thing. It's like they had a morning guy who works for 6 hours and a night guy, afternoon guy who works 6 hours. But then at night they would switch over to the country station of Saginaw, which was WKCQ. Yeah, they had a long-term agreement with them to simulcast them at night, so they could stay on the air 24 hours a day. And anyway, the rest of the story. So anyway, back to Rock 105 and 95.5. So Rock 105 and 95.5, they now have a night show, a nationally syndicated night show called Greg B. Harrell. And this guy is, so the story with Dave, so I read his Wikipedia page. The guy was born in Canada. He worked in Canadian rock radio for many years, and then he moved to America. And now he's based out of Los Angeles at KLOS. And so this is the story. What they do is they say that his show is on from 7 p.m. till midnight. Well, the show is not a full-blown radio show. The network that syndicates the program, I read the website, and what they do is they allow their affiliates to program up to like 12 songs an hour. And and of course they only give like 6 minutes an hour of Bejarro's content. And usually it's he's not live on the air. This is all pre-taped stuff that he did like months ago. As a matter of fact, I actually listened online, and one of the bits that he did was he got a phone call from a guy who was barbecuing and swimming in his pool, and I'm like, this is Northern Michigan. It's like, this is definitely not a local show. This is definitely a show that's supposed to sound like a local show, but it ain't. And And to me, it's like, I will never understand how these companies think. It's like, it kind of reminds me of what happened when Ryan Seacrest syndicated his morning show. So the story is he's also based out of Los Angeles. And they decide, so here, when it aired here in Grand Rapids, it was on Hot FM 105.3. So the story was they would only give the station like 2 minutes of content at a time. And it's like if he was talking with a celebrity, they only aired little bits and pieces, and then Ryan would go on and say, to hear the full interview, go to ryanseacrest.com or whatever the fuck it was. And that's kind of what is going on with this Behero guy. It's just bits and pieces, and then for the rest of the hour, it's all music. It's basically a canned radio show. So, as I've said this once, and I'll say it again. I've said it many more times. I'm glad Traverse City has an active rock station, because active rock is, corporations have ruined it. There's no active rock station in New York City. I don't even think there's one in Los Angeles or Chicago. I think I even mentioned that the biggest city in America at one point that had an active rock station was Dallas. But you see, this state has been blessed with many active rock stations. The Riff in Detroit. GRD here in Grand Rapids. Q106 in Lansing. Z93 in Saginaw. Banana 101.5 in Flint. And, of course, Rock 105 and 95.5 in Northern Michigan. However, Rock 105 and 95.5 is a very flawed station. Because, number one, it's true. The ratings have not really recovered since Smitty left the station. And Smitty even said during a podcast why he left the station. It was because of money. He mentioned that he only got paid, his best year at the station, he got paid $40,000. And I'm like, I was paid way more than $40,000 this past year. And I live in Grand Rapids, and I'm probably living in a cheaper house than he does. Yeah, Smitty, last I checked, Smitty actually lived in Mansalona. In an apartment building. I believe his apartment is like above a tattoo shop. I could be right, it could be wrong. I actually saw it. It was actually pretty nice for Mansalona. I even did some more history behind that, and it was actually an old IGA building. The original Johnson's IGA in downtown Mansalona before they moved to US 131. Of course, that building's long gone. I believe it's now where Dollar General, or Family Dollar, Family Dollar, yeah, I think I'm right, is now standing. But you see, folks, that's the problem with radio. They're cheap. They think that anybody will listen to crap. And I'm like, it's like, it's like this, I've noticed this too, that Greg is a guy who does a lot of, what's that term? Self-depreciating humor. As a matter of fact, the main picture that's of him online, it's a picture of him with egg on his face. And he even made a post online making fun of himself, saying that this guy is degrading and needs to be put off the air. Signed, Greg Behero. Now, what's amazing to me is that the big three radio groups in Northern Michigan made all these changes right at the new year. In just a month or so before the fall book comes out. And of course, and it's amazing that a lot of the changes in Northern Michigan radio have been positive. I will admit that in recent months, especially with KLT adding a Friday night heavy metal show. I'm actually happy they did that. They should have done it 30 years ago, but beggars can't be choosers. But the reality is that radio needs to know what the listeners want. Quit making foolish mistakes that will chase the listener away. Because let's face it, one of the reasons why I started Chuck69.com all those years ago was because I hated Northern Michigan radio. I hated the lack of variety and selection. It was just boring. And then what happened was then came satellite radio, and then the smartphone, where you can listen to all these radio services like Spotify. You can even start your own radio station. And it's amazing how in just 10 years time I went from living in a shitty area when it came to rock radio to, well, at least there was the zone, but there was also all these digital choices. And that's the competition, folks. It's sad when people are willing to pay to listen to the radio. And, they got to, and I understand they have, it's not just, and I know they got to make money. They got to know, but they got to know what people want, And all I can say about that is, if a radio station doesn't have listeners, they got to figure out what to do next. It's a plain simple fact. 100.5 The River here in Grand Rapids had really shitty numbers. So guess what happened? They flipped to Classic Hits. And then 98.7, the old Classic Hit station, went to Detroit Sports. So now that big fat dingleberry Bill Simonson, he actually has competition now. I'm happy. I'm happy that Billy Boy will probably start to sink in the ratings because of this. But it is what it is. If radio stations want, because look, folks, I've seen too many radio stations fail, like KLQ here in Grand Rapids. They failed. That station fucking failed because of people like Matt Hanlon, who cared more about the bottom line than the listener. And look at what happened to Citadel. Not just KLQ, but Citadel, the Citadel company, the whole company. It went belly up. And, sometimes you gotta, if you don't like what you hear on the radio, you gotta speak up. And it goes with anything, politics, or the food you just ate at that restaurant. This is why I do what I do. But anyway, all I can say is it will be fun. It will be a little bit fun to see what will happen in the next ratings book. I'm thinking that maybe all the changes were made because maybe they all the owners knew what was going on. Or maybe they had another way of determining who is engaging in their product. It's not just, Nielsen ratings anymore. It's who's visiting the websites, who is listening to their online streams. There's many ways of knowing who their listeners are. You understand? Okay. So that's the some news that's going on in Northern Michigan radio. So anyway, I got to get going. I'm going to wrap it up because I got to do some shopping right now. We're having a kind of a rain-snow mix here in Grand Rapids today. So anyway, good day and good luck. King Chuck, over and out.